Hi, and welcome to the tutorial for these two knit ponchos. There are a lot of crochet poncho tutorials here on YouTube, but I prefer knitting over crochet anyway, so I wanted to make a tutorial for these. Here are the two ponchos that I'm going to show you how to make. They are both very easy, very beginner friendly. They both use the same lace stitch. The only difference is the construction is slightly different. So you will need to know the basics of knitting, so how to cast on, cast off, knit, and purl. And then some other techniques that you will need to know or will have to look up how to do is yarn over, knit two together, and then we're going to do some seaming at the end. But that is all of the techniques. I believe that is all of the techniques that you'll need to know, so it is very easy. I also wanted to mention that I have this as a free written pattern on my website, so I will link that down in the description below. I feel like that'll be especially helpful for people who have been knitting and they know how to knit garments, just because that'll be a lot quicker for you to just read the pattern instead of watching me go through step by step. And then lastly, you can follow me on Instagram at @KylieMakes. And if you make either of these ponchos, I would love it if you would tag me there. And that is all. We will get started. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Like I mentioned in the intro, I am going to be showing how to make two different ponchos. They are very similar. They both use the same lace stitch. The only difference is the construction is slightly different. Both constructions are very easy. They just give a slightly different look. So you can choose whatever silhouette you like better or make both like I did. Yeah, let's just run through the materials and the yarn for what you will need for both of these ponchos. Starting off with yarn, for the first poncho, I'm going to be using Sandnes Garn Tynn Line. It is 53% cotton, 33% viscose, and 14% linen. This is the color Matcha, and this is a fingering weight yarn. I am going to be holding this double to make a DK weight, so both of these ponchos will be DK weight. So I have this one for the first poncho, and in the second version of the poncho, I'm going to be using Knitting for Olive Pure Silk. This is the color Lemon Curd, and this is 100% silk. Again, this is a fingering weight yarn, so I'm going to hold this double for a DK weight. And I will put the amount of yarn I ended up using on the screen right now, just because I am filming this prior to making the entire ponchos. So I will put the amount of yarn I ended up using on the screen. And then for the knitting needles, both ponchos use a US 10.5 needle, which is a 6.5mm needle. You can use a range of cord length because we will be working flat, so it's less restrictive than working in the round, but once we get started, I'll let you guys know the length of the cord that I'm using. And then lastly, you just need a darning needle because we will be weaving in ends, and then after we block the pieces, we'll be seaming a little bit, so you'll need a darning needle for that. And that should be all the materials that you need. Okay, first things first, I am going to show you guys how to do the lace stitch that is used in both of these ponchos. And I'm going to show you while I make my gauge swatch. I've already made the gauge swatch for the green one. This is what it looks like. Since the yarn that I'm using for both is very similar, they're both fingering weight plant-based yarns that I'm holding double. So it's most likely that my gauge is going to be the same for the green as is the yellow, but I'm just gonna make a yellow one anyway, and that way I can show you how to do the lace technique. I do highly recommend making a gauge swatch. I know people don't love to. It is the best way to ensure that what you're making will fit. Yeah, let's just go ahead and make the gauge swatch, and I will show you how to do the lace pattern. All right, let's start our gauge swatch. So I have my needles, which are the US 10 or 6.5mm needles. I have them on a pretty short cord, so this is at 8 inches or 20cm cord. Then I have my yarn, which I am holding double. And I am just gonna start by casting on 30 stitches. So go ahead and cast on 30 stitches using whatever cast on method you prefer. Alright, I've cast on 30 stitches, and the first immediate row I'm going to do is just going to be to knit across. So just knit across the row normally. All right, I knit across that first row, and then the second row is going to be just purling across. All right, I knit one row and then I purled one row, and now we are ready to start the lace pattern repeat. This lace pattern is a 4-row repeat, and this first row starts on the right side of the work, and I will put up on the screen written out what the pattern is as we go. So first stitch, you're just gonna knit normally, so knit one, and then you're gonna yarn over, which means bring your yarn to the front of your needles, as so, and then you're gonna knit the 2 stitches together as one, and then you repeat that. So yarn over, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2 together, and you are going to repeat that until there is 1 stitch left on the needle. Okay, yarn over, knit 2 together, and now there is 1 stitch left on the needle, and you are just going to knit that normally. So that was the first row, and now we are on the second row of the repeat, which is on the wrong side of the work, and you are just going to purl across this row. All right, now we are on the third row of the pattern repeat. We are once again on the right side of the work, and row 3 is similar to row 1. We do pretty much the same techniques, just in a different order. So you start off the same, and you do knit 1, and then from here you immediately do a knit 2 together, but don't yarn over yet. So just knit 1, and then immediately knit 2 together, and then you start the yarn over. So then you yarn over, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2 together, and repeat that until there's 1 stitch left on the needles. Yarn over, knit 2 together, and now there is 1 stitch left on the needle. And because we didn't do the yarn over right in the beginning, we are going to do the yarn over before the last stitch. So yarn over and then knit the last stitch, and that is row 3. Always remember on row 3 of the pattern to do that yarn over at the very end of the row. If you forget that yarn over, then you won't have the correct number of stitches on your needles, and that will mess up the lace pattern. And now we are on the 4th and final row of the repeat, which is just a purl row. All right, I just finished purling that 4th row, and that is the lace pattern. You can see how it's pretty easy to memorize. And so now I would just be back to row 1, and I would start those 4 rows all over again and repeat them. And so that's what I'm going to do for the rest of this gauge swatch. The gauge swatch for this project, the stitch gauge really only matters. The row gauge doesn't really matter because we are going to be measuring our work as we go. So I'm only going to make my gauge swatch a little taller, maybe like that big. And then I will cast off and block it. So I'm going to make this gauge swatch a little bigger, and then I'll come back when I'm ready to cast off. Alright, here is my yellow gauge swatch that I finished. I ended up doing 4 repeats of the lace pattern, so 16 rows total. And like I said, it didn't need to be very tall just because we want the stitch gauge. The row gauge does not matter. And I bound off immediately after the 4th row of my last repeat, and I did Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. I highly recommend doing some sort of stretchy bind off, just because this lace stitch pattern is so loose. If you do a regular bind off, it'll really cinch in the work, and then you won't be able to get an accurate stitch gauge. So some sort of stretchy bind off is recommended. So now I'm just going to show you how to measure your gauge swatch. Let me zoom in. Alright, so I've laid out my tape measure along my gauge swatch. You want to figure out how many stitches are in 10 centimeters. And because this is a different pattern, I wanted to show you just because it's not very easy. It's not as easy to count your stitches as it would be on just a stockinette stitch gauge swatch. And so the way that I figured out how to measure this is that each hole is 2 stitches. So if I start right here at 0, there's a hole right here, so that'll be 2 stitches. The next hole, that's 4 stitches, 6 stitches, 8 stitches, 10 stitches, 12 stitches, and we are now at the 10 centimeters. So I have 12 stitches per 10 centimeters, and that is how you are going to figure out your gauge. All right, now that I've shown you how to do the lace pattern and we've done the gauge swatch, the rest of this tutorial is quite simple. I've already done all of the math for you in terms of sizing and stitch count, so you pretty much just have to follow along. So let's first talk about sizing. I made 5 sizes for this pattern. I would usually do 10, but since I'm doing ponchos, and ponchos don't really have a whole lot of shaping and they're meant to be quite oversized and just loose and not a lot of shape, I've grouped sizes together. So I've done sizes 1/2 and then 3/4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9, 10. So each size has a range of bust measurements. So for example, size 1/2 fits a bust range of 76 centimeters to 88 centimeters, or in inches, that would be 30 to 35 inches. I have a bust circumference of 32 inches or 81 centimeters, so I would fall into the 1/2 size range. So like I said, I'll put the size chart up. You can see all of the sizes and then choose based off of my size guide what size range you would fall under. We are gonna start with the green poncho. This poncho is pretty much 2 rectangles that we make identically, and we seam them together at the very end for like along the shoulders. The panels are done exactly the same, so we'll do the first panel and then you will repeat that for the second panel. And so we are gonna start by casting on. I am using the same needles, so my US 10.5 needles or 6.5 millimeter needles. And I'm using quite a long cord. This is a 22 inch or 55 centimeter cord. You can use a shorter cord. Your stitches might just be a little more bunched up. And then if you're making one of the larger sizes, you might want to use a little bit longer of a cord. All right, so I am going to start by casting on for my size. So for the size 1/2, I am going to be casting on 108 stitches. So go ahead and cast on for the amount of stitches for your size in whatever cast on method you prefer. All right, I have cast on my number of stitches for my size, which is 108. And this first row, I am just going to knit normally, so similarly to the gauge swatch that we did. We're gonna knit 1 row and then purl 1 row, and then we can start the lace pattern. So let's knit this first row. All right, I have knit that first row, and now I'm going to purl this row. All right, I have cast on, I knit 1 row and purled 1 row, and now we are ready to start the lace pattern repeat. And guess what? That's pretty much all you do for the rest of this panel. I will put up the lace pattern repeat on the screen that you are going to follow. If you want a more detailed explanation of how to do the lace pattern repeat, I show that in the beginning when I'm doing the gauge swatch, so go back to that so you can see if you need a more detailed explanation of how to do it. But from here on out, you are just gonna follow that pattern. So you're going to do those 4 rows and repeat them over and over again until your work measures the length that it's supposed to. I'm gonna make mine until it's about 47 centimeters long. I will put up suggestions for how long you should make your panel based on your size. These are, however, just suggestions, and I recommend knitting it and then holding it up to your body to determine how long you'd want it. I've already started my first panel and I'm this far along. So once you get to a certain point, you can hold it up to your body. I want mine like right here, which is about 47 centimeters for me. So I am going to knit both of these panels until they are 47 centimeters long, and then I will show you the next step. Also, I wanted to show how I keep track of where I'm at. Even though this is a very easy lace pattern to memorize, you can get lost on where you are. So I just like to write out 1, 2, 3, 4 over and over again, because those are the 4 rows that you repeat over and over again. And then once I do, like, I'll do a row 1 and then I'll cross it out. And so that way I'll just keep track of where I am. It's not very pretty, but that's just how I do it. It's very useful. Okay. So panel number 1 is almost done. I just need to cast off. So I finished, my last row was a row number 2 of the pattern repeat. I would just recommend finishing after a row number 2 or row number 4 so that you are casting off on a right side of your work. And you can see this, I did all these markings for this first panel, so now when I do the second panel, I will just follow this and I'll do the exact number of rows. So I'm going to cast off using Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. It's pretty much just a regular bind off, but you add yarn overs to make it a little more stretchy. Use whatever cast off you prefer, just something that has stretch. And then you are going to knit up your second panel exactly the same as this first one, and then we're going to block both of them. We're going to block them before seaming them, just because this lace pattern does grow, so it's best to do that first and then seam things together. So I'm going to cast off and then block this and start the second panel. And I will come back once both panels are finished and blocked, and I'll show you how to seam them together. Voiceover Kylie here. So here are my 2 finished panels for the green poncho. They are both blocked and dried, and I just wanted to demonstrate that you're pretty much just going to put the 2 panels up against each other, and that is how the poncho is going to form, like that, up against your body. So here it is flat on the floor. So you're going to seam the left shoulder, you're going to seam the right shoulder, and then that space in the middle is where your head is going to go, so that's going to be the neckline. And then here is a diagram of it, so it's easier to see. So as you can see, you seam on both sides, and then there's that opening in the middle. I ended up doing the opening 32 centimeters flat, just so you know the measurement that I ended up doing. And I did a whip stitch in order to seam the panels up. Here is the finished green poncho. You can see the 2 rectangles that were seamed together, and then the head hole. I like to wear it like this off the shoulder. So cute. You could also wear it like straight on, like with both shoulder seams on the side. But I think I like it off the shoulder more. Cute. Okay, let's do the yellow poncho now. So the green poncho was 2 rectangles that we seamed together in the end. And for the yellow poncho, this one is just one really long rectangle that we are going to fold and then also seam, but just in a different way. All right, so I have my needles, the US 10.5 needles or 6.5 millimeter needles. And then the cord that I'm using is a 14-inch or 35 centimeter cord. This one's a shorter cord than the one that I use for the green, just because I'll be casting on less stitches than the green. You could use the longer cord since we're working flat. It doesn't necessarily matter. If you use a longer cord, you'll just have more space on your cord. If you use a shorter one, your stitches might be more scrunched, but I found that this size works for this. Okay, we are gonna start by casting on the number of stitches for your size. Again, I'm a size 1/2 in the pattern, so I will be casting on 54 stitches for this. I will put up all of the sizes and how many stitches to cast on above me. So I'm gonna cast on 54 stitches, cast on in your preferred cast on method. All right, I cast on my stitches, and similarly to how we did the gauge swatch, I cast on, I'm gonna knit one row and then purl one row, and then we can start the lace pattern repeat. So I'm gonna knit this row. Right, now I'm going to purl this next row. Okay, and now we can start the lace pattern, and you are just going to repeat that lace pattern over and over again until your work measures the length specified. If you want a more detailed look on how to do the lace pattern, I show it when I'm doing the gauge swatch, so earlier in the video, if you need a more detailed explanation and view of it. But you are just going to do those 4 rows of the lace pattern over and over again until your work measures what it's supposed to. So for my size, I'm gonna work until this measures 125 centimeters. I also wanted to say I showed this for the green one, but just in case you're just doing this yellow one, this is how I keep track of the lace pattern. It's a pretty easy to memorize 4-row repeat, but you could get lost what row you're on. So I just write out 1, 2, 3, 4 over and over again, and then I'll just cross off what row I did as I go, and so that way I can keep track. Yellow panel is done. See how long it is? It's like the length, if I hold it up to myself, it's like the length of my body. With this version, with the yellow version, it's pretty customizable about how much oversized or how much positive ease you want, because the length that you make it, you're pretty much just gonna, it's gonna be like wrapped. It's pretty much gonna be wrapped around you like this, like when we seam it up. So if you keep knitting to make it longer, it'll just create more room for your body. So I knit mine to 120 centimeters, which is what is recommended for my size. And now I'm just going to cast off. I'm going to do Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off, and then I will block this, and then we can seam it to make the final poncho. Hi, doing a voiceover for this part. So here is my finished panel, this long yellow panel, and I'm just demonstrating that you're pretty much just going to fold it in half, and that is how we are going to make the poncho. That's what it looks like on the body. So here it is flat, and where I'm pointing up at the top there is where you are going to seam. And here's a diagram to make it a little easier. So when you fold it in half, there's a side that is closed and there's a side that is open where the 2 ends meet. On the side that the 2 ends meet, that is where you're gonna seam up top. And the other side is where you leave an opening for your head and neckline. I left that opening 37 centimeters flat because I wanted mine to be off the shoulder. And then I ended up using a whip stitch to do the seaming on this poncho. Okay, here is the yellow poncho all finished. You can see that here's the head opening, and that is where I seamed. And I made it so that it could be off my shoulder like so. So you wear it this way, or if you flip it around, I also like it this way. I feel like that's cute as well. Okay, I wanted to do some sort of outro. So thanks for watching this tutorial. I hope it was clear and concise and it all made sense. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those in the comments and I will try to answer everyone's questions. Again, you can follow me on Instagram at @ShitKylieMakes, and if you make either of these, please tag me so I can see them. And that is all.